Stigma in society has gotten a lot better in regards to mental health issues and addiction. In the past 20 years since I've been in the therapeutic community, it's gotten exponentially better. But historically, in this country and probably throughout the world, the stigma and the judgment of mental health issues has been really, really strong, which that has prevented people from seeking help. Now, when you look at this idea of a stigma is a judgment, and people judge things that they fear, and people fear things that they don't understand. So, one wonderful thing that's happening is people are starting to understand more about mental illness. And social media, even though I have a lot of problems with social media is wonderful in gaining more information about things that you don't understand. So, I really like the fact that individuals are becoming more educated in mental health and addiction. But let's look at just the stigma that is out there, okay? So if I'm stigmatizing something, I'm judging something, meaning I don't understand it, and there's probably a level of fear. Well, what does that do to the individual that is struggling with mental health and or addiction? Well, it cuts off a major lifeline of support for them. And what do I mean by that? Humans are social creatures. We need other people to survive. If you look at attachment theory, even right now, Gabor Mate, who I refer to a lot, is doing a lot of work on authenticity and attachment. But the idea that attachment is we need connection with other human beings to survive in life. Just like we need food, clothing, and shelter and water, we also need social interaction. Addiction and mental illness, one of the root effects of those two ailments is it pulls you away from your social connections. People that are depressed isolate, people that are anxious isolate, and people that struggle with addiction eventually end up isolating. So it cuts us off from that social connection. So we've already got a disease that is cutting us off from a social connection. And then we have a society that is judging us for the disease that we have. So why in the hell would I go out and ask for help if A, what my brain is telling me is to isolate, and B, what society is saying is we don't believe you, we don't trust you, we are not going to help you. That's the first idea of stigma is it really prevents people from seeking help. If an individual wants to become less judgmental, it's very easy. If they want to become more knowledgeable, it's very easy. Get past your own preconceived ideas or your misconceptions of what addiction is, what depression is, what anxiety is, what bipolar disorder is, or the myriad of other mental illnesses, and just go read about them. There is a plethora of literature out there that speaks in layman's terms, and I am not a scientist, so I like stuff that's easy to read and easy to understand, and go educate yourself on what these conditions are. The worst thing that you can do is just give your opinion about something that you have no idea what you're talking about. And I don't mean to be a jerk, but a lot of people do that. A lot of people think that they know what they're talking about, and they give an opinion about, say, somebody that's depressed, saying, you're not depressed, you're just sad, get over it, quit acting like a baby, you have you have complete mental weakness, you're not strong. Those are just damaging, hurtful things to say, and they're not true. Historically, women are allowed to have their emotions, right? They are allowed to cry. They are allowed to be sad. They are allowed to be scared. They are allowed to have a wide range of emotions. Now, I'll be honest, probably they're not allowed to be angry, right? Women get stigmatized when they're upset in an anger stored way, when men aren't stigmatized for being angry. Men are allowed to be angry in our society, or historically they were, but they're not allowed to be scared. They're not allowed to be sad. They're not allowed to cry. That looks like weakness. That is not macho. That is not masculine. If you have a man that cries, he lacks testosterone. He's a wimp. So there is that stigmatization still between the two genders. And I'm just talking about two genders. I'm not talking about all of the genders right now. So, societally, people aren't going to judge a woman for taking an antidepressant as much as they're going to judge a man. Why? Because men are supposed to be stronger than that. It's okay for, and I hate to say this, but it was okay for a woman to be quote unquote weak, right? Because the man was there to save the day and to help out. I think that's all garbage and BS, but I believe that has influenced our society. So when you look at the rates of, let's say, self harm, right? If a man doesn't have anywhere to turn for mental illness, let's say that he believes society thinks that if he asks for help or if he takes medication, he's weak. He can't go to his friends and talk about how he's feeling, or he's perceived as weak. He can't go to maybe even his partner to talk about how he's feeling because he believes he's going to be perceived as weak, or he perceives himself as being weak. He can back himself up into a corner and recognize, or at least feel like there is no help for me. And the only option then is to take a drastic measure in some form of self-harm, or ending one's life. And so I do believe that that is a direct result of the stigmatization of mental health in society, especially when you look at older men. When you get to, there's a very high rate of self harm in men that are retired, that don't have a lot of purpose anymore. And then they're feeling down. They're feeling like their life doesn't have a lot of meaning. There may be the older generation, baby boomers, who weren't allowed to have their emotions. And so those behaviors end up happening more frequently. We want to wake up every day and realize, okay, I'm contributing in some way, shape, or form. Now, some people's purpose, I've got my father is retired now, and his purpose is to go out and enjoy life, in travel, and use some of his resources, and go experience and learn about other culture and about other things in the world. So he's not going to struggle with depression as much, but he also has those resources to be able to do that. Individuals that don't have resources, that are just kind of stuck at home with no job, with not a lot of social connection, tend to, fare more poorly than others. I believe that the younger generation, my daughter's age, and maybe even lower, are becoming less judgmental. I can't speak for your generation, but my generation was really, really judgmental. I mean, in the 80s, we made fun of each other. That's what we did for fun. Um, we were not nice to one another. We were very cliquish. There's a ton of John Hughes movies about the 80s, Breakfast Club and Pretty in Pink, and all of these movies where all of these cliques in high school, and I don't know if it's the same way now, were very awful to one another. Now, why are people judgmental? It's easier. It's just easier. If I have a belief system on how the world should work, how people should behave, what they should look like, uh, so I'm comfortable, right? If I have if I painted a picture of what everything needs to look like out in front of me, so I'm comfortable, anything that doesn't fit that narrative, I'm going to judge. And it's very easy to do that. It takes a lot more work for me to be vulnerable, to walk through some fear, and to do a little bit more research uh, about my judgments than it is just to be judgmental. Now, I want to get back to how stigma in judging people with mental illness, if we were to correct that, how that might help. There's nobody, at least in this country, that isn't affected by addiction and or mental illness in some way, shape, or form. What I mean by that is we all know somebody or are personally experiencing some form of mental illness and or addiction. Our society is, in my opinion, being exponentially more affected by mental illness today than we were 25, 30 years ago. And maybe it's because we're talking about it more, right? But I also believe just the division in our country is creating more mental illness. The division in our country is creating a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression, a lot of addiction, a lot of hostile behaviors, a lot of judgment. People's belief systems can influence depression and anxiety also. The information that people consume can cause depression and anxiety. And if you're sitting in front of MSNBC all day, or if you're sitting in front of Fox News all day, and you're just being inundated with how awful the other side is, and then you realize that 50% of the population is the other side, that's pretty depressing. And we can go ahead and blame the politicians. We can go ahead and blame the other side or the algorithms or the social media or the news networks. We can go ahead and blame all of those entities for the division in our country. But in reality, we as an individual are responsible for correcting that behavior and changing the trajectory of our species, evolution. Now, what we tend to do is blame everybody else for the problem. And most of us don't take personal responsibility for our own contributions to the dysfunction in the country. Understand the first thing is getting some education on what mental illness is and addiction, okay? And becoming a little bit less judgmental about that and a little bit more empathic. What that will do is if society embraces the idea that depression and anxiety and bipolar disorder and addiction are no different than cancer, diabetes, right? Then there will be more compassion for the individuals that suffer with those ailments. When the individuals that suffer with those ailments know that there's more compassion and understanding, they are exponentially more probable of going out and getting help. If they know that they're not going to be stigmatized and judged, they're going to go get help. If you're diagnosed with cancer, if you're diagnosed with diabetes, there's probably not a ton of shame about going out and getting help because you know that people are going to greet you with open arms. They're going to be caring. They're going to be understanding. And you're going to just get the help that you need immediately. Individuals that struggle with these other ailments like addiction and mental illness, they tend to wait until the very last moment before it's almost too late to get help. Now, with that said, mental illness and addiction, especially addiction, it is soul crushing. It robs people of their life essence. It robs them of their vitality, but it also destroys relationships. People that have cancer don't tend to lie and steal and cheat and manipulate. People that struggle with addiction do. If other people are going to be more understanding of, let's say, addiction, and they're going to do their research on addiction and they're going to just be better informed. If the addict knows that there's not as much judgment out there, if there's that they're gonna be treated fairly and kindly, then they're probably more apt to go get help, right? But addiction still hurts other people. It still destroys relationships. It still destroys trust. So the individuals, let's say the family members or the loved ones of addicts, there's always a question of, I love this person, I care for them, but they have hurt me so bad that I don't trust them, I don't like them, I don't want to be around them, I don't even know if I want to help them anymore because they've burned me so many times. Well, the addict has to know that that exists and recognize that that is the consequence of their behaviors. But what does the family member do in that situation? I have so many people come to me and they're like, "Well, I want to get my family, I want to get my loved one into treatment, but I also need them to fix our relationship right now." And those two things can't happen at the same time. So family members are always asking, "What do I need to do? What do I need to do?" Well, the first thing you need to do is separate your loved one from the addiction and recognize if there's an active addiction going right now that you are talking to the quote unquote addict and you are not talking to your loved one. You are not talking to that person that was there prior to the addiction. And if you can separate the addiction from the person, that is the first thing to do. And the first thing we need to do is get rid of the addiction. Once the person is withdrawn from the substance and once they're in a program of recovery, then we can address all of the things that happen during the addiction. That's really hard for people to do, but that's the first step is to, okay, I'm dealing with the addict and I'm also mad at the person. Let's get rid of the addiction first, and then we'll deal with all the wreckage of what the person created. That will also help people get into recovery because there's a little bit more empathy in that moment.